Welcome, everyone. This is the third event in Celebrating Our Own, a series embedded in the Great Writers, Great Reading series of Hofstra University. But this is the first academic year in which Celebrating Our Own has launched, and we will have more alum of Hofstra reading in the future. It is a joy, a pleasure for me to introduce you to Cristina Cortez. I will say a few words about her and her work, and then she will read for about 25, 30 minutes, and then there'll be a question and answer period. And you may ask questions. Once the question and answer period begins, you may turn the cameras back on and either raise your hand or type a question into the chat function, whatever works best for you. Cristina Cortez is a first-generation Latin American poet born to immigrant parents. She holds a BA in English, Creative Writing and Literature and History, with minors in Latin American and Caribbean Studies with honors and distinction from Hofstra University, from which she graduated in 2015. She also holds a Master of Fine Arts degree in Creative Writing and Poetics from the University of Washington Bothell. Her thesis there, Unbound, is a cross-genre memoir about living life with a disability. She has been a speaker at TED Talks. She was a speaker at a TED Talk Everett in March 2017. Her poems have been published in the literary journal I Come From the World, among others, and has also been anthologized. She was a guest speaker at Breed Middle School's Spanish National Junior Honor Society chapter, Rigoberto Menchú Peace Nobel Prize, and interviewed on radio shows with Raquel Quezada. There are a number of other things that I could cite, but I would rather just say a few words about Cristina because you have access to her bio note. Most importantly, her first bilingual poetry collection, Tawantinsuyu, Poems of the Time of the Inca, published in 2020 by Books&Smith New York Editors, is a celebration of the history of Peru and its indigenous people. As we learn from a profile written by Ginny Greenberg of Hofstra University, the Director of Public Relations, Cristina's bilingual poetry collection is a celebration of the history of Peru and its indigenous people. The word Inca in the singular, Cristina explained to me in a recent conversation by phone, refers both to the people and their culture, whereas in English, the word Incas would seem to connote only the people, a people. This attention to difference, to nuance, is characteristic of the linguistic sensitivity Cortez brings to the work of composing a poem, her intellectual and sonic precision in relation to lyric. One of the things that Cristina said to Ginny Greenberg when Ginny was doing this profile is the following. I found that the times I spent writing and reading were when I felt the most myself. I wasn't focusing on my disability and things I couldn't do. Instead, I was dreaming about the possibilities available to me and everything I could accomplish. As a teenager, Cortez discovered magical realism, a genre that resonated with her sensibility and spurred her imagination. She was inspired by reading Isabel Allende's The City of Beasts and also The House of Spirits. In addition to its influence on her writing, that novel and others like it also sparked Cristina's desire to travel. The summer before her senior year, she enrolled in Professor Patricia Navarro's Hofstra in Ireland program. In Tawantinsuyu, Poems of the Time of the Inca, ancient artifacts are given voice. They speak to us directly. The speaking stone or image, a monument or painting addressing its audience, is an ancient strategy, one that continues to animate poems in many languages and cultures. Think of Percy Shelley's Ozymandias, one of the most famous poems in English. A sonnet sparked in part by a visit to the British Museum, where he saw artifacts that Napoleon had brought back from Egypt. But Shelley didn't see any remaining part of Ozymandias, Ramses II. He recalled the words that the Sicilian Greek historian, late Roman Empire, Diodorus Siculus, reported in his volume of world history. It's actually 40-volume history of the world. It's only in one of the volumes that he reported the words inscribed on the pedestal of Ramses II. And then we think of the Colossus, the sonnet by Emma Lazarus, whose lines are inscribed on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, written under the influence of Shelley's poem. When I asked Christina whether Emma Lazarus's act of giving voice to Lady Liberty had influenced her work, there was a pause and a laugh and a recognition. And she said, it wasn't something she was conscious of, but now that you mention it. Poems and poets exist in conversation with each other. Cortez's work opens new pathways to new conversations. Please join me now in welcoming this young poet, Hofstra alum, now a published author.
Thank you, Phillis Levin, for that wonderful introduction. I could not ask for a more perfect segue into my work, into this event. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I would like to begin this presentation. Pero no puedo, Dios mío. Pero no puedo leer, sí. Okay. Excuse me, technical issues here. You will not be able to hear, you will not be able to see me, but I believe you can hear me, correct?
We hear you.
Yes. I just have my lecture text here for the presentation, and I cannot see and be seen at the same time, unfortunately. So I would like to begin this presentation by acknowledging that we have come together in this virtual space to celebrate the release of my book. But not only that, we have come to celebrate a culture, a people, or peoples, as can be debated, of the region of the Andes. But first, I would like to thank the Great Writers, Great Reading series for actually hosting and having this event, the English department, Professor Martha McPhee, and Phillis Levin herself for actually walking me through this event and making it such a success with this great turnout. I'd like to thank all of you for coming tonight and celebrating with us. Last but not least, to thank the English department for actually hosting me and homing me for my undergraduate years. So thank you to all, and I would actually extend my gratitude to the tribes whose land we actually live on. I am coming to you from Massachusetts, the territory of the Mohican, Wickajock, Makantuwuk, Wachuntok, Machusett, Wechusuk, Stockbridge, Nipmuc, Pennacook and Agawam peoples, among others. I would like to acknowledge that I am a visitor in this land as one that is not native to this state, but has made it my home. And we are inhabitants who have a responsibility to acknowledge those who came before us and those who are still here in the form of the native peoples. The first peoples of this nation are still here, and they should be acknowledged and respected. This commitment to solidarity that I have declared is also the commitment of solidarity that is represented in my work. The indigenous peoples of the Americas, as I've said, are still here, and they still belong to these lands. We belong as well, but it's the indigenous peoples who came before us, who have to be recognized as ancestors and ancestral peoples. According to the past, indigenous natives are mostly a thing of history, but they have to be acknowledged that they are part of this history. They are part of our current times, and the contacts between them, the conquerors and the settlers who ended up staying here, are also part of that story. We can neither revisit or re-edit the history that we've lived through without even erasing the contact that has been made. It has to be said also that the indigenous peoples were gradually pushed to the boundaries of common knowledge and land, literally and figuratively, by the settlers who were here. But this narrative is a Eurocentric narrative whose main premise of supremacy is one that seeks to debunk and work against in my studies of Native American writers and my own work. As we discuss the origins of my work, it is necessary to acknowledge, to state that my work is directly influenced by magical realism. Magical realism is a style of literature common to Latin America, that originated in Latin America, that is characterized by its blending of literature and history. This blending of literature and history is in the form of anthropological, literary, and temporal mixing, where history and the present become one. Neither can be separated without the other, and neither can be fully itself without the other. So with that, I would like to go forward and state a comment put forward by Rina Spayat, my forwardist and my mentor, who said that the contention and the conflict among history and literature is in itself the contestation between peoples, and the contestation between the origins of what is to be in this context American. I should mention that American in the context of Latin America encompasses all of the Americas, the whole continent. And that continent is in itself split by the Panama Canal, which was split for the convenience of the settlers and the Northern Americans, specifically the Western peoples. And it was completely for their convenience. The land itself cannot be divided, neither can it be owned or displaced. The land is indivisible, and it should remain such. So with that little segue, I would like to actually begin the reading of my work. And here we go. Let me see. Here we are. Here we are. Sorry for the disturbance, but my screen has blanked. Here we go. Okay. The first one, which I will read, is called A World of Stone. Here among the mist. Reading a little bit out of order here, but I'll have to do this. I'm going to read the poem in the center of the handout of the works I prepared today, which is Coricancha, for the convenience of today's presentation. Coricancha. Before the Spaniards came, my walls were covered in gold plates. The temple of Coricancha, was covered in gold. My gardens were decked with the statues of the creatures of the valleys and mountains made of gold. My gardens were decked with trees of gold and silver leaves. The Spaniards stripped me bare of my gold and silver, but I still stand. The Spaniards built a church to their God to cover up the past, but I still stand. An earthquake came and crumbled the church, but I still stand. I am Coricancha, the central temple of Cusco, the sacred dwelling place of the royal ancestors of the Inca, until the Spaniards burned them and disturbed their rest. The Spaniards built a church to their God to deface me, but I still stand. Here I still stand. Here I still stand after 500 years. Here I still stand. I move with each earthquake, but I stand still. The walls of the cities built by the people of my land still stand, and the fog of time descends upon the land. With that first poem, which is the central poem of Tawantinsuyu, I would also like to segue to a second poem. Can you still see me, hear me, and see me?
And hear you.
Yes.
We now see you and hear you.
Okay, I'm just checking. So let me here then. The second poem, which I se me fue la presentación. The second poem, which I will read, is Sacsayhuamán. Sacsayhuamán. In the Cusco Valley stand the ruins of a wall called by many names. Sacsayhuamán, 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 Sacsayhuamán. It is said to be a fortress. It stood strong in the time of the Inca. It stood strong against the Spaniards. It stands strong against the winds of time. To this day, it stands strong. It has not fallen. It is not crumbling. It stands strong. And when all the creatures are gone from this earth, it will still stand strong. When time has reached its end, it will still stand strong. La primera. Now I will read the opening poem of Tawantinsuyu, which will also give you a taste of the original, the larger work called Hawa. A world of stone. Among the mountains veiled in mist, valleys and deserts. Once ruled by the Inca, lies a world of people long gone. This world is covered in stone, and upon that stone you will find my face. I, Jaguar, have been called by many names since life's beginning. In the mountains and valleys. Yeah, se me fue. With that reading, I will have to leave you with that reading for technical difficulties. But I hope you enjoyed that part of the reading, and I hope we can continue the conversation of indigeneity and indigenous peoples. So thank you for attending the reading, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Christina, would you like me to read another poem from your book for you?
Would you actually, if I may, can I ask Rina Espaillat if she's on camera, if she will be on camera to actually read part of the foreword that she has written? Rina, stay. I guess not.
Is there anyone who could read the Spanish?
Yes.
Do you want anyone to read the Spanish for you?
I
Yeah,
think I can do this.
Rina?
Wait a minute.
Está
Yes,
ahí.
yes. Alt plus A. All I have to do is be heard. All I need is to have my sound put back.
Can you unmute yourself?
No, I can't.
Carol, are you able to unmute?
Rena is unmuted. We can hear her speak.
I'm hearing you.
Yes, you're looking
You
for the.
can't hear me. All right. Well, let me simply get a copy of the book, and I will read right away.
Rena, may I ask if you'd like to show the video of yourself while you're reading?
A video?
Yeah, yourself, your face.
To start your
Sure.
video?
Sure, fine. Why not?
Not a movie, not a home movie.
And start my video. There I go. I have tremendous admiration
No entiendo cómo se me.
for this young poet who is not only a poet, but a scholar. Well, I have Zoom here. I cannot, I can't find I can't find the space. How do I get myself seen?
You are seen.
Yes,
can
you're
see
being
me?
seen right now. You're all set. You can
You
just
are.
go ahead and read.
Okay, let me get the book and I'll read right away.
Cristina, this is one of your mentors?
Sorry, I was on mute there. Rita was the one who encouraged the translation to begin with, and
Is
it's
it
been a
more
wonderful
work
mentor.
you'd like me to read, Christina?
And el prólogo, cuando lo primero dos párrafos.
Okay. Los primeros dos. In this book, whose bilingual title reflects the divisions that underlie its theme, Cristina Cortez has blended curiosity, anger, regret, and invincible pride in her heritage. And from that uneasy but powerful mix, created a long poem that is at once elegy, song of triumph, and guide to the future. The monuments left behind by the Incas, Cortez reminds us, survived the Aboriginal kings who dwelt and worshipped in them, as well as the European marauders who conquered the rich and powerful culture that built them. Those palaces and temples stand to this day and tell us so in their own words, as the poet gives them voices in which to recount history, defy time, and invite the present reader to judge the tragedy that was and is colonialism. Should I read the next one, Cristina?
I think we
I'll go
should
on.
hear a few of the poems in the voices of these sculptures at some point, of these statues.
Well, I'd like to say something about the poet herself here, because she's a very unusual person. And I think she speaks for all of us who are the mixed people of Latin America. She says, and yet the poet herself is a product of that tragedy, a member of the profoundly and inextricably mixed race that populates the Americas to this day. She would not be the extraordinary human being she is had that tragedy not taken place. Her work reminds us that the very word American, too often narrowly used to define only the citizen of the United States of America, a great nation that oddly enough has no word for those who are exclusively the citizens of its 50 states and territories, has a much broader, older, and more genuine denotation. American properly refers to the people of the entire continent, once called the New World, whatever the geographic or political state within it, their language or their customs or ethnicity. They, or should I say we, came into existence precisely because adventurous, ruthless European powers bent on gain overran the enormous territory that stretches from the Arctic to the tip of Tierra del Fuego, and claimed to have discovered it after it had been inhabited and owned for thousands of years. And I'll stop there. But that's the identity of a whole people. Thank you, Cristina.
Muchas gracias, Rina, por leer esas palabras. And if I may, I will now read the first poem of my new collection in progress, Ancestral Voices, Historical Sonnets of El Salvador. This is a Petrarchan sonnet crown in English and Spanish. I will read the English, as the Spanish is in the works right now for the translation. 1. In Mesoamerica, there once lay the fatherland of the Pipil nation, the country of El Salvador. For Spain, Pedro de Alvarado, the conquistador, robbed it. With lust he dared and hoped to find the mystic land of El Dorado. With no gold found, he still claimed the dark vessel and its volcanic soil. Battle cries echo wooden lances snapped. The stunned Pipiles in vast numbers fought to defend the land with their patriarch. Their bodies and wrapped their bodies to defend their homeland. But in battle, native bodies were doused in a red flood, facing conquistadors' arquebus blast and the sword's bite. The slaughtered warriors' blood dripped onto the conquered sod. On the unquiet ground lay brown limbs, hacked and strewn in blood. With those dead, spirits anoint the harrowed and hallowed site. Across the winds of time, the Pipiles' outcry rang loud. That is the first of the whole Petrarch and Sonic Crown in English. If there's time, I will read more. Would we like to move to the Q&A? I'm willing and able.
Why don't you, since it's a crown and you've written two, perhaps you could read the second one, or maybe one more poem from Tawantinsuyu. It's up to you.
I will read the second. I have it right here. Across the winds of time, the Pipiles' outcry rang loud, resisting Alvarado and his men's steady advance. For the homeland, Prince Satoni Atanal sets his stance and threw a stone that struck the conquistador, who was cowed by a wounded thigh. An 8-month-long infection left him bowed. Still, it is said that Adlacatar, with his lance, took a stance and threw it, splintering the conquistador's thigh, halting his advance. At the Battle of Acajutla, Alvarado was left gored. Yet, for 10 years, the Pipiles kept the Spanish invasion at bay. Despite their resistance, San Salvador was built in the palace in place of the sacked Cuscatlan. Spain claimed 4,000 miles. It took the captors a year to hold the occupation. That in its wake left behind the Pipil nation's blood spilt. Still, the will of the people shan't wilt.
Thank you. Rena, I'm so glad you're here with us, and I know that you've been an essential mentor to Christina. It seems as if you run a translation workshop that she participated in. I might misunderstand that. Is that so?
I did run one for several years, and then alas, COVID came along, and we could not meet in person anymore. So I'm hoping that maybe by the end of this year, we'll be meeting in person again.
And this is within Massachusetts?
Yes, it is. It's in Newburyport.
Oh, wonderful.
I live in Newburyport, 37 miles north of Boston. It's not very far, but we do it in my house because I like it intimate. I like it, you know.
And you yourself are a poet and translator.
Yes, that's right.
And is it you who told Christina that it is she who should be translating her work into Spanish? Because I know Christina and I talked about how she writes in English and then her work is translated. Was it you who encouraged that?
Well, I did encourage her. I encouraged her, even if she doesn't end up translating it herself, she should be able to judge every translation made for her.
Of course. Yeah.
I think that the poet really should have a finger in that.
Yeah.
And I'm a great believer in translation. I think that we need it desperately
Yeah.
for human reasons as well as for literary ones.
Well, usually with poetry in particular, one needs a poet to do the translation to the language that's being translated into, the receiving language. Usually the person has to be a poet.
Where you want it to be as much as possible like the original, so as to create in the reader the illusion that he's reading the original poem, but of course he's not.
Yeah, illusions are very important. I have a question. I'm hoping the audience members have questions. I will ask one question, and then I'd rather hear from others. And I see there, I don't know what, Carol, are you there? Maybe you'll see if there are questions.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Because it's hard for me among all of the chats to see, because there's congratulations and there's a lot of wonderful exclamations, but it's hard to discern where the questions are if people aren't raising their hand, or so maybe you can help me with that, Carol. But one of the things I know, I wish I wanted to hear even more. I'm now hungry, but I have your book, and I hope other people will buy your book, Tawantinsuyu, Poems of the Time of the Inca, which looks like this, but in mirror image probably. And one of the things I noticed is the incantatory quality, which is also, of course, central to how poetry works, whether in an oral or written tradition, because even in the literary poem, the poem written for the reader, it still has to be performed aloud. And the ritualistic elements often, unfortunately, disappear over time as people orient to the page more. So I was very pleased to see and hear the way you deployed refrain, incantation. It's not only in how you recite the poem, it's in the phrases. In particular, the use of the word still. Shakespeare plays with the word still over and over in some of his plays, because it's one of those wonderful monosyllables that in English means its own opposite, meaning things continuing and things stopping. I'm wondering if when you talk about still standing and standing still, if you could talk a little bit about that in light of all the things you talked about, the people, the survival of people, the people pushed to the edge and yet being there somehow. Christina.
Yes, to answer that question, well, I have to mention one thing, that the incantatory quality was actually encouraged. It was actually encouraged through the fact that I actually went to Ireland in my junior year for study abroad. And what made me fall in love with Ireland in the first place was nothing less than the Irish music. The original Irish music in Gaelic has a completely different oral quality than I had ever heard before. So I said, that oral quality has to go into this poetry, not because it was imitating Ireland, but because it was imitating or echoing the practice of the indigenous peoples who didn't write normally, who didn't write anything down, who actually passed it on orally. And I should mention that the Inca did not have a written language. What they had was sewing and knotting, which is called tokapu and quipus, the making of quipus. And quipus and tokapus were their way of recording history. So literature and history are one and the same, as well as textiles are one and the same for them. So in that case, the oral quality for me was absolutely central to capture. And what other way than to echo the way that they actually used oral tradition in their cultures.
Thank you, Christina.
We have a question here from Myra Bun Osuna.
Yeah.
Sorry for
Christina, I'm sorry, Christina, what inspired you to write your poems and to publish your book?
Well, to answer that question, to write my poems, I've been writing my poems since undergraduate college. And what actually inspired me to actually work on them fully was a challenge by Professor Kaplan, who challenged me to write the poems that later became the ancestral voice poems of El Salvador. She challenged me to actually write them in Petrarch and sonnet form, and that's where the sonnets came from. But more largely, when I had the sort of indigenous kind of pseudo-religious sort of religious experience of doing a Mayan rebirth ceremony, I was encouraged. I felt myself compelled to write this history of Latin America through these books, and I was completely compelled to have them written. And what compelled me to publish them was the fact that I always wanted to be published. And the way I found to be published was to publish them myself with an independent press. And so I found Books&Smith, and we just agreed on the publication, and here they are. Here they are. So
Ron Johnson, you have a question.
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yes, we hear you.
yes.
Okay, Christina, I wanted to thank you very much. I received this book at 5 o'clock this afternoon in my mail. So it was quite a coincidence that it arrived just today. I've read it. I spent the hour and a half before your program started reading the book. It's wonderful. I'm so happy to see it, and thank you so much for it. And Rena's introduction too is very interesting to me because of a lot of things related to problems of teaching, like what does American mean and so on. But
I'm so glad you received it in time.
Yeah, me too. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about it.
Yes.
First of all, a kind of linguistic question, I guess. In the title, the suffix suyu occurs here, and it also occurs in the names of several other places you mentioned in the poem. What is the meaning of suyu?
Suyu in Quechua, I should mention that there are two versions of Quechua, the A version and the B version, just as in Greek, ancient Greek, linear A, linear B, the same way.
Right.
So Tawantinsuyu in the original Quechua that has been captured by linguists and reconstructed, suyu means land, and the prefix of Tawantin actually means the whole land. If you look at the actual poem that's called Land of Four Quarters, I believe.
Oh, yes.
It says Tawantinsuyu is the land of four quarters. Colasuyu is the northern part. Colasuyu is the northern part. Tawantinsuyu is the eastern part, and so on and so forth. So they didn't have a conception of land as a territory.
Yeah.
Land for them was the world. Their world was the Andes region, which was Tawantinsuyu.
I see. Okay, thank you. And another question, if I may. I don't know much about Inca at all, so this is quite new to me. I've studied Maya culture quite a lot, so I know a lot about Maya. You say in one important line in this poem, the Spaniards built a church to their god to cover up the past. And I'm wondering about the dimensions of meaning there. One of the things I've seen in Maya culture in Mitla in Mexico, for example, the Catholic Church is built immediately on top of the ruins of the Maya temple that it displaced. And I'm wondering, when you say they built a church to their god to cover up the past,
Yes.
That could be part of the meaning.
It was actually the church that they built in the center on top of Coricancha was actually built on top of it in the same way
Yeah.
as in the Maya situation and the Aztec. So it was a complete rebuilding, a complete overbuilding, rebuilding it entirely on top of the previous structure. Why not in a builder's sense? Why not use a foundation of something that has already stood years?
Exactly.
But ideologically, it was to say this is wrong, we're right, we're right, and to actually dominate them in the minds of the people was to use the structure that was already there. If you read further in the poem, I believe you'll find a line that says, "They burdened them and disturbed their rest."
Yeah.
What they did was sack the peoples, the remains of the Incas that were there. It was a collective tomb of royalty. So you would sack the place that they are resting in and say they no longer exist. They're gone.
Yeah.
They're not important. Whereas in the Inca sense of culture, the dead are still at the table, so to speak. There are ceremonies where the actual dead bodies, not to be morbid here, but it's really beautiful. The actual dead bodies are actually sat at their tables where they used to sit at their tables as ancestors. So the ancestors are still sitting at the table enjoying their meals with the people who are living as a way of respecting them and saying that they're still here.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Thank you for that. And
yes.
I really
And we have to talk about your interest in Maya, because the whole book of Howard, the larger book, talks about not only Maya, not only Inca, but all the indigenous peoples of North and South America.
Yeah. Well, there's so much shared amongst the cultures. The jaguar, for example, is so important in Maya, and the jaguar figures in your poem, I see. So, yeah, this is really wonderful, and giving voice to the buildings themselves is a brilliant move. I think you did a great job here.
Thank you so much.
I see
and
that.
I hope you enjoy the read and sharing it with your class.
A few more questions. It's a little hard to see them, but I believe that Simon Doubleday, by the way, anyone who would like to may be on camera again. During the Q&A, you're not required to turn off the video. Hello, Simon Doubleday. You have a question, and also Benita has a question. So Simon, hello.
Yes, hello, how are you? And how are you, Christina? It's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
And I think the last time that I saw you as a student, perhaps was in the class on Renaissance history and early modern history, so the culture of the colonizer. I wanted to ask you about your relationship with these colonized peoples, because at some stages you referred, you did wonderful acknowledgements of the indigenous people of North America, of Massachusetts. You referred to yourself as a visitor in these lands, I believe. But I also sense in your poems a tremendous sense of affinity with these peoples. I wonder if you could talk about that, a sense of connection, a sense of empathy. I'd love to hear more.
Well, to speak about my relationship with the indigenous would be one thing, but to speak about my relationship with the colonizer, so to speak, is to acknowledge that I actually am colonized in two senses. I come from a Spanish and indigenous background. As by default, the Latin American peoples are mestizo, are mixed race. Therefore, I am mestiza. Pipil Maya, to be exact, the El Salvadorian people are Pipil Maya. So I am Spanish and indigenous in that sense. So I cannot be separated from either one of those lines. I am both. So in the second sense is a bit personal in the way that as a person with disability, I'm often marginalized by the common mainstream cultures. And not to say that that hasn't limited my way of navigating the world. If you remember, I never ever let my physical condition affect the way I performed in class. I was always one of the students who was always in the front row, and so on and so forth. So I was never letting myself be limited by the fact of my physical difference. But the fact of my physical difference also impacts the way that I navigate and the way that people see me. If you don't hear me talk, people probably assume, oh, she can't talk, she's in a wheelchair, whatever that happens to be. What happens to be your prejudice or your former way of seeing things ends up being what you think of me, unless you meet me for the first time and you're working with me. So in that sense, I'm colonized. So I always have a sense of a double consciousness of being bilingual, of being multicultural, of being Latina, but also being a United States citizen, a European citizen in that sense. And I'm always conscious of that. And I have to acknowledge that I am a visitor because some of the indigenous nations do not consider mixed blood to be indigenous. So I had to put that forward. I hope that answers your question.
It really does. That was an extraordinarily helpful answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for asking that question, Simon. We have Benito, and after Benito, whom I don't know, I think Madeline has a question. So Benito,
Yes,
Thank you.
go ahead.
Benita, sorry.
Yes. Congratulations, Christina. It is also a great joy for me that you had been my student, particularly in the Latin American Caribbean Studies courses, and now you have this wonderful book. So congratulations.
Gracias.
Sí, I read this book of yours, Tawantinsuyu, as somehow homage to the city of Cusco, and also a book of poetry about resistance and about resilience. And of course, the city of Cusco was also the great city of resistance and resilience, right? The city where it is still overwhelmingly community of Inca people today. So I don't know if you want to talk about Cusco in this sense, or about the concepts of resistance and resilience.
Well, Cusco, in the sense of the poems, I can say this, that it only receives one slight mention, but Cusco is the central city of Peru and the old capital of both Peru and the indigenous and the Inca Empire. So it had to have a place in the poems. Although it only has one line of mention, Cusco also represents a walk to the past, because if you actually see Cusco, it's divided into two parts, New Cusco and Old Cusco. And I've never been to Cusco or Peru, but if you see Cusco, you see the old and the new together in one synchronous sense where they are one and the same. Again, I say that magical realism is a mix of history and literature and one and the same, although you can't separate them at all in certain senses. So Cusco to me is both the heart of the past and present, but it is also a call to the city for what it once was. And for me, I had to mention it because it was central to the peoples, and without mentioning the capital city, we wouldn't have Peru, we wouldn't have the Inca. Most of the monuments inside that were built by the Inca that I mentioned are in Cusco, or Cusco in the indigenous language. I used Cusco directly to pay homage to the indigenous language of Quechua, and as much as I could, to acknowledge that the language is still here, the language is still spoken, although there are very few native speakers, but it's being reconstructed. So thank you for that question, and I look forward to more.
Madeline has a question.
Mhm.
Madeline?
Hi, I'll start my video.
Thank you for being with us.
Hello, hi Christina.
Hi.
Congratulations on this event. I'm really excited to get your book, and from what you've read, I really, really enjoyed it. I just, as someone who likes to write myself, I was just interested in like the different poetic forms that you use. Like you said, you'd use like the Petrarchan sonnet form, and I was wondering, I think you said that Janet Kaplan suggested that you do that. What was that like? Like what kind of forms were best for you in writing these poems?
Well, I should clarify not to mix both collections. Tawantinsuyu is not, Tawantinsuyu does not have the sonnets, but the sonnets are coming in their separate collection. So to answer the second question, thanks for the question about that. To answer the second question, you and I were both, I believe, in Professor Kaplan's class.
Mm-hmm.
So we could only see parts of the poems we were reading.
Right.
And I believe that no one, hardly anyone, aside from Professor Kaplan, actually saw those sonnets, because they were actually a special component of what I was ending up doing. And she said, why not see them? Why not let me see them privately and with extreme attention to form and content? She said, write the content first and then put in the form. And the way I insisted on the form now and back then was because the history of El Salvador is very close to home. I could write it any way I wanted, but I said, let me do sonnets, because then there's a seriousness, there's an elegance, there's a force behind the sonnets that wouldn't be written any other way. If I had written them loosely, it would be more personal, more introspective, more secondhand, a secondhand history, which I was not privy to. I am privy to because I live with my parents and I live with my brother, who lived through the Civil War of El Salvador, but and left because of it. But I said, let's go with the history, because the history is more my area, more my expertise, shall we say. And I felt that going with the history, I could give an kind of a larger scope to the people dealing with this, dealing with the times, dealing with the history, dealing with the country and the state that it was, and something that I could not even see before I saw the history. So it was a way of me to acknowledge the history that I was a part of, but also the history that I wasn't a part of, and that was closely related to my own family history. So that was a way of acknowledging the past and acknowledging the present.
Yeah, that's
in
wonderful.
the form of my decision to do sonnets. But I should say that they were really difficult, because they were really difficult, but they're worth it, because you see the connections between the sonnets, the links never break, the turns always happen, but they happen in a unique way that is influenced by Spanish sonnets in a way that is not common in the English. And I chose Italian because it's closest, the Italian form because it's closest to the Spanish form. And I wanted to also acknowledge that as well.
Oh,
So
Thank you, Madeline. That was a great question, because the paradox of the sonnet is it's a small form, but it tends to be connected to the monumental in terms of praise. I mean, it's often, it's called a monument. And there's a way in which its centrality in so many cultures crosses all these languages. And so by choosing to center this story in a European pattern, which then has been adapted and adopted for 800 years since its beginning in the early
It
13th.
goes with the mixedness of the people.
Yes, exactly. And
Yes.
It brings in the various streams that make us one family. Because after all, we are one
you're
family.
talking about Peru. When I, many years ago, I was asked to work on an English translation of a poem by the Spanish Baroque poet Quevedo, who wrote many sonnets, some while he was in prison. And the person who asked me to do it was from Lima. And he gave me the literal English, and then he said, now make it into a poem. And then he kept reading it over and over in Spanish to me. And I don't know Spanish. I had studied Latin and French and Italian. But it was this collaboration. And then he brought in somebody else from, I think, Colombia. And so there was this collaboration and this excitement over how to get it to sound as close as possible in a language that doesn't sound anything like it, which leads to my final question, but other people might have a final question, which is, you're writing in English and then translating into Spanish, yes?
Yes.
And you told me on the phone something fascinating, which is, though you're completely bilingual, you didn't want to speak Spanish until you went to high school.
Yes. And
So,
yes.
So it's almost as if you had to alienate yourself from a home in order to go home.
Yes. Linguistically and culturally as well.
Which is not that, in a way, when one is exiled, one discovers home. I feel as if that's partly what you do, what you're doing.
Yes.
So when you're working on the Spanish translation, there's always a frustration in translation because one can't get the English to do what the Spanish does, or the Spanish does what the English does. Could you convey or communicate any frustrations you've encountered?
Frustrations with the translation, I can definitely tell you that I have, with Tawantinsuyu, for instance, it was easier because it was free form. And I could easily manipulate to make them look and sound equally well in either language. And to me, the fact that it's a bilingual text, one after the other, actually shows me that both versions are the original version. There's no such thing as English and Spanish afterwards. They're both simultaneous, although they're after one another. They're simultaneous in the way that they came about, although the translation came later. In Tawantinsuyu, I have to say that the Spanish was more a sort of more emotional for me to encounter these poems in Spanish. It was more emotive of what I felt was in the Spanish than was in the English. The English to me was the poem itself, the structure of the line, as you mentioned to me, the lines, the way they break were unique in themselves. And to me, but the Spanish, the linguistic quality, the song quality, the oral quality in Spanish is heightened by the Spanish. As with the sonnets, I have to say that with the translation, it's a lot harder. It is a lot harder, I have to say, because the translation is bound by the same rules of the sonnet, of the Petrarchan sonnet, as in the English.
Yeah.
40 lines, 10 to 12 syllables, the turn on the 9th line, the content turn on the 9th line in that sort of sense of time and space. But I have to say that the Spanish was a lot harder because I had never read sonnets in Spanish. So what I had to do was literally go to the biggest sonneteer in Spanish of Latin America, which is Rubén Darío, and read him until I was steeped in the language. Although I do not agree with the way he writes his sonnets symbolically, what I found was the technique of using the same word twice, as in pipiles, staunch. Certain words that I repeat in the sonnets have different meaning in their context, in either of their contexts, and that comes directly from Darío. If I hadn't read the Spanish, that wouldn't be a constant trigger of certain language usages and terms as it is in the English. So the Spanish readings influenced the way the English was written, and the Spanish influenced the way the English was actually read. Because if you heard the way I read it, it was more deliberate, stronger in certain parts, softer in others. It was based on the way that he wrote his poems. So I mimicked the way he wrote to mimic the way he read. He wrote to mimic the way I read the poems. The way he read, the way he wrote was the way I read. So
wonderful. Well, this is total cross-pollination. There's a last question. I believe Evelyn had a question. Evelyn,
yes.
are you here? Yes. Evelyn?
Hello? Camera?
Evelyn, you're muted, I think.
I don't hear. We don't hear.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Camera, please.
My question is in relation to the Petrarchan sonnets. I have the opportunity to be with you while you were writing at the Hofstra University. So are they preserved over time, or they evolve and change through the years?
You're asking if they changed, if they transformed in the context, in the content. Yes, because I have to say that the earlier versions were just about content and not about form. They were 14 lines, but that was it. There was no sense of rhythm. It was a rhythm that was not there in here. And as you can see, and as you can hear in the translation, in the new translation that we did, it's more melodic, it's more rhythmic, it's more about sound and sense together and content together. So yes, they did evolve, and yes, I think the readings that we did, the reading quantity and quality that we did for these sonnets has definitely impacted the way they've changed, because work changes in relation to the work you're reading, even though you don't realize it. It was intravenous, if I can say it that way. It was, Darío wasn't meant to be an influence. As you know, I've always commented that Darío is not one of my favorite sonneteers. I am more inclined to like Terence Hayes in English than Darío, because of his symbolism and symbolic nature. But the sonnets are influenced by Darío's lexical prowess, not their content, but their lexical power. And I have to say that they changed in relation to that.
Well, right now we should
about the sonnet. Phyllis, may I say something about the sonnet?
Of course.
Yes.
It's magical. It was invented by an Italian, by D'Alentino. And then every diplomat who came to Italy from anywhere else in Europe sort of stole it. And it became everybody's property. It became the little magic box that could hold anything. When D'Alentino invented it, he was thinking of it as an expression of love. You know, it was a love poem. And for a while, that's all it did for its living. It just spoke about love. But very soon it branched out to all kinds of other things. And now there are so many different forms, so many variants of the sonnet, the different rhyme schemes, different breaks, different positions for the white spaces. It's magical, and everything that it does, it just does it to perfection. I don't think there's anything that the sonnet cannot say or do.
Christina, thank you.
My favorite form.
Thank you. The graduate course I'm teaching this semester is on the sonnet tradition. So I think some of my students are really smiling widely to hear you, because a lot of them were quite trepidatious about, oh my God, can I put my foot into this? And they're really in it and swimming.
Yes.
And it is quite a discovery. Christina, you use it's verbal prowess and power. That is what you have. It's in your book. In cantatory phrasing, it's in your syntax,
Thank you.
and in your sonnets, which are more difficult to translate because the syntax itself is much more convoluted, which it tends to happen in a small space. Brava, I really look forward to reading the sequence as it evolves, and I want to stay in touch with you the rest of
Of course.
right.
Of course, and if I may, I have to mention our personal connection here. One of the reasons that I was so excited to work with you for this event was because, as many might not know, I was supposed to take two classes with you, but couldn't because of credit overload and credit mismatch. So I would have loved to work on these sonnets further with you in those classes, but I'm glad that this event happened, and I'm glad that our interests align in such a way that we are on two different sides of the linguistic branches of the Latin language, French and Italian on my part, and Italian on yours, but Spanish on mine. So I'm very happy that we overlapped in that way, and we overlapped in our interests as well. I'm very grateful for this event, and grateful for all the ones who showed up here today, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christina, and all of you who participated by listening and by asking questions. Really bravissimo.